MTN. Everywhere you go.
The 8 o'clock hour brings you a fine conversation every day. And so I have Ephraim Ramwenge, who is joining me in the studios today. Good morning, Ephraim.
Morning, Jesse. How are you?
Doing great. First, to start the conversation is, what are your impressions for the campaign so far?
I mean, we are going to vote. We are hot. We're ready to vote. Yeah, I think the energy is everything, and it shows and it reflects where we are, what's on our minds. I mean, if you haven't registered to vote, please go register to vote. I think it's star 169 hash. Register, find out your eligibility. Know where you're gonna vote from. It's very important. I can't stress it enough. You need to lend your voice to something like this. It's very important.
How do you see that the politics of the day has affected work?
I don't know what you would. Okay, it's for me, what I see in Kigali, it's business as usual. I think those who have the luxury to be able to step away from that work have stepped away. But I love the fact that His Excellency kind of gave us, he kind of allowed, he lent his voice to that particular issue. He said that campaigns should not stop work. He says we are working. So he said, at the end of the day, if you have the luxury to go, if your employer can allow you, if you're a business and you want your people to go, if you're a retiree and you have the freedom to go, if you can take leave, take it. If that's up to you, but it shouldn't stop work. And so from what I've seen, those who have the luxury have gone. Those who have responsibilities and obligations that they need to take care of have stayed and done their work. And I mean, it's about finding balance. Life is about balance.
Will you go to any rallies? Because I'd like to go with you.
Most definitely. We'll pick a good site. No, actually, historically, there are some sites that are actually really so much fun. Like we'll pick like 2 or 3 and we'll go.
In Nyarujenje?
Nyarujenje, I feel like I don't know yet. We'll see. But we will look for like some out of town is the best. Man, you should out of town, the energy is
I think people in Musanze had fun.
Yeah, no, they most definitely did. They most definitely did.
I also saw the Green Party. They also had fun yesterday. They were proud of the numbers they pulled off. I can't remember exactly which area they were in. They had some real good numbers there, but mostly children.
I mean, they are the future. They are the future leaders of tomorrow.
Very interesting. Today I'm excited to have you, Ephraim, and here to discuss the Pareto principle, also known as the 80-20 rule. Now, I'd like to see if we can apply this in the space of entrepreneurship. Okay. Normally, this is a rule people talk and use in creating a balance of how to make use or the most of their money. But how can we apply the same principle, the Pareto principle, in the space of entrepreneurship, which is your space? Now, your job today is to provide insights on how entrepreneurs can leverage this principle and optimize their businesses to achieve greater success, which we all strive for. To start off this conversation, are you able to explain what the Pareto principle is, its core concept, and how does it apply in the field of entrepreneurship?
So the first time I actually heard of Pareto's principle, it was actually in a movie. How old was I? I was super young. Granted, if I say this, you're talking about when you found out that you're really old. If I say this, some people might not even know what this movie is. There's a movie, so Tyler Perry, his content with Medea and all of those, there was a season where they were really like the thing. And so there's a movie called Why Did I Get Married?
Why Did I Get Married?
Do you know the movie?
I think I've watched it.
Yeah, with Jill Scott, Tyler Perry, and all those people. Then there was also Why Did I Get Married too. So Why Did I Get Married? The 80-20 rule is where I first heard of it. And so it obviously was talking about actually it was talking about marriage and fidelity in marriage.
Mm.
And they were saying that sometimes you find that you have a spouse who has 80% of what you're looking for. And then comes along somebody who has the other 20% that the person doesn't have. And then you end up getting distracted by that person, thinking that that person is better than your spouse. And you forget all the other 80. And so that was the first time I heard of it. And it, in that movie and in that context, it was completely off of what the actual law says or principle says. So obviously then I went to university, and then that's when I actually learned about Pareto's law. And an interesting thing about it is that once you learn about it, it changes the way you look at the world. It actually helps you become an effective human being. And I think I've talked about circle of concern, circle of influence, and circle of concern and circle of influence is more to say, yeah, there are many things that concern you, but invest your time and energy in the things that you have influence in. And so that's what the essence of this law kind of highlights.
Mm-hmm.
So there was an Italian economist called, again, Pareto, Frido Pareto, if I'm not wrong. And for him, he was an economist. So he was looking at it from a macro perspective. And that's actually what we're going to talk about earlier when we now talk about the cons of framing your perception through this. So he looked at Italy, and he looked at the wealth distribution of Italy. And he found out that 80% of the wealth had been concentrated into the hands of only 20% of the population. And obviously, I can't get into the details of it, but as he continued to just assess that reality and that phenomena, he started to notice also at a micro level in his own life some of these aspects of this 80-20 rule, that 20% of the things in his life generated 80% of the results. And vice versa. And so he found that, for example, the happiness he found in his life came from 20% of the things in his life. He found of the friends in his circle or the relationships he had, 20% of them brought 80% of the fulfillment. When it came to his work, he found that 20% of the work that he did brought 80% of the accolades and the resources and the money that came into his life. And so it became this thing where he started realizing that this principle transcends just wealth distribution. It's applicable to our lives. And so that's the essence of the principle. But now when you look at it from an entrepreneurship perspective, the question, or at least the point, is that 20% of our effort, our investment, our team members, our strategic actions and decisions generate 80% of the results. That is the principle, or at least that's what Pareto's law is as it pertains to life in general, but also entrepreneurship.
Now, listen, how do you identify the 20% and be sure that this is equal to the 20% that will contribute the 80%? I know one of the aspects of applying this Pareto principle is identifying that crucial 20% that drives 80% of the results. But maybe there are some practical steps or strategies entrepreneurs can use to pinpoint these vital activities or factors within the business.
Okay, so you've heard me say this not once, not twice, many times, that you cannot improve what you don't measure. You've heard that, right? Django, you've not heard. Let me repeat it. If you look like you have never heard me say it ever, let me repeat it. What you cannot improve what you don't measure. It's next to impossible. Like, how do you know that you're progressing? How? Like, do you trust? Is it intuition? Is it a feeling? The only way you can determine that there's progress in a particular area is to set, first of all, a unit of measure, and then also, so that the unit of measure is what is the determinant of progress. So if it's a business, the determinant of progress could be your profit or your revenue or your growth. Growth could be how many customers you serve, or it could be how many employees you have, or how many markets you're in. You set that unit of measure. Then now that's when once you have it, then you now start to set the determinants to achieve these things along a timeline, right? So you say, I would need to get to serve 1 million clients within 36 months, which is 3 years, right? And so now that's your unit of measure. Now, when you go about working, you now see, okay, we are now at 10,000 clients, we're at 20,000, we're at 50,000. You can only improve that because you have that unit of measure. So that's step number 1. So once you have figured out, okay, I want to improve in X, Y, and Z, you set that unit of measure, you say, I'm going to improve this particular aspect because that's what, for me, determines, quote unquote, success, right? After you've taken that first step, then you have to now identify how you're going to achieve that. And so in strategic formulation, and I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible, there are different stages. But one of the stages that we get to after we've set our objectives, our mission, our vision, our objectives, is what we call critical success factors, CSFs. And I know you know this stuff, right? Now, for me, when I tell you you have to have a unit of measure, I've worked backwards, because after you have your critical success factors, you set your key performance indicators, your imihiku. These are the things you want to, these are the things that will determine what success looks like for you. That to say, oh, okay, we have succeeded at this. I prefer to work backwards because I'm like, okay, if I know where I want to go, then I now know what I need to do to get there. So now when you set these critical success factors are exactly what I've just said, critical success factors. What are those things you need to do to succeed? The action steps. I've talked about this on Kigali in the morning with Belize here. We've talked about how I view goals as action oriented. So you set the 10-year goal, then you create action steps towards that 10-year goal, instead of setting New Year's resolutions every year, which are almost redundant and pointless. So if you go and you set actionable steps towards your 1 million clients, you find that it now becomes very easy for you to now track your activities and see how efficient you are. Now let's bring it back to Pareto's law. We have just said that 20% of our activities generate 80% of the results. Now, let me make this a little bit more practical for somebody to understand. Think about the clothes in your closet or your shoes. For me, it's shoes more than anything. I think my closet is very efficient, but shoes are where I think I have a weakness of sorts. Out of 10 pairs of shoes, how many do you actually wear? Jesse?
If it's not my sneakers?
Or let's take your clothes, because I know you have a lot of clothes. out of your clothes, all the clothes in your closet, what percentage do you wear most of the time?
If there was no one to pick for me what to wear, okay, then I think I'll be picking the same T-shirt for as long as it's washed.
Exactly. So you find that 80% of your wardrobe goes wasted. And that's the most inefficient way as a human being to live. Why would you go spend all that money? It's dead assets, right? You've pumped in a lot of money. And I know, Jesse, you're a man of taste, so you like to really spend on your things. So I can guarantee, if I'm to value your closet, you have a whole car or two sitting there doing nothing. If we're going to expose you. So,
meanwhile, I have no car.
That's the thing. And so your car is just sitting there. You go, and now interesting thing is that also clothes depreciate. So you're not going to sell those clothes at the same value you bought them.
Of course not.
So you find you have all this extra efficiency that's just wasted. This 80% of capital that you've invested. So now, when we talk about trying to figure out how to go about being efficient with Pareto's law, where we now talk about critical success factors, you cannot do everything all the time. You're one human being. Jesse, I've seen you. You try to do everything all at once, but even you know you have your limits. So the question then comes in is, if I'm going to go about my critical success factors, I'm going to determine these activities I need to do. You need to ask, because I only have 24 hours in the day, how can I be most efficient with my time? Now, if you're measuring, you can start to see what are the things that I do that bring me the most value. We know. Let's talk about even just money. What are those activities I do that bring me the most money? Because you find we get busy, but sometimes we get busy with nothing. Now, you asked me about practical steps. I have this metric I use. It's like a table of sorts, right? So I have urgent, important, not urgent, not important, not urgent, important, and then not urgent, and so urgent and not important. You've understood the matrix. So let's just take it like a window, right? So up here you have urgent, here you have important, right? So the first window here on the top, if anybody can visualize this, and I'll try to describe it as best as I can. In the top left corner, you have not urgent, and then you have not important. Then when you go down, you have not urgent, but important. Then when you go to the top right, you have that's urgent, but not important. Then you have urgent and very important. Now, when you have that metric, every time you look at your activities, again, we're talking about critical success factors, right? The activities you need to do to see your 1 million clients, right? You need to look as you do your things to do list every day. People talk of time blocks. So you put your things to do in time blocks. But I also like to tell people, beyond putting them in time blocks, also put them in important in this window. There are some activities we have, Jesse. Someone will put you under pressure, stress you, tell you it's urgent, and it's genuinely urgent.
On their side.
Even on your side, by the way, it could even be urgent. Like your Mukozi at home can be telling you to put cash power. It's an urgent thing. The guy is ironing. But to what extent is that really an income-generating activity?
Well, if you have a presentation to go make and you don't have what to wear.
Left home. You are already making money. You're in the marketplace. And the Mukozi calls you post Muriroyashi's. And so you ask yourself, that's urgent, but is it really important?
At the moment, it might not be.
Exactly. You find even when you go for certain meetings, someone is like, we need to link up. You might find in the mind of the person, even in your mind, it might be an urgent gathering, or it might be an important meeting because there's some strategic things you need to do. But the projects you're going to do are going to be, you're going to do them in 5 years' time, in 2 years' time, or in a year's time, or in 6 months' time. So it's important, but it's not urgent. So then the question then comes in is, how do you allocate your time? Because you only have 24 hours. And so for me, like I said, those are just, like I said, you measure, you determine your critical success factors, then you now determine which of your critical success factors are the most important.
Isn't this too much work? Entrepreneurs to effectively allocate their resources, which is the time, the money, the effort, after identifying the 20% that yields the most significant results. I don't know if there is an example that you could give. You've spoken about the boxes, but then what's a real-time example that we could look at? Allocate your time, your money, your effort.
Okay, so one thing that a lot of people don't know, I think you learn it as you grow older, and I think for me, it's when you ask me what is that thing that I realized that, okay, I'm now like aging, is when I started realizing that I have limits. Limits are one of the things that actually make you realize that you're actually getting old. And someone
limits in what context?
Just knowing that you're a human being. Like, and I know it sounds crazy to say, but like, for me personally, I always knew I could do everything all the time. Like, I had the capacity, I had the bandwidth, I had the strength. But man, in today's society, like by 9, I'm exhausted. Exhausted, and I could have just been doing one thing the whole day. Which is not bad, because at the end of the day, if it's one focused thing that is high value, again, coming back to this Pareto's law or principle, it's not an issue. But I think for me, what I want people to understand, especially when I look at entrepreneurship, there's this belief that if you just got more capital, all your problems will be solved. Or if you just made more money, all your problems will be solved. Have you ever heard people crack jokes saying people are suffering from success? Have you ever heard that?
They suffer from success.
Do you know one of the most stressful places to be as a business person is where you have customers who want your product, but you can't service them? That is the most frustrating place to ever be as an entrepreneur. Yes, when you don't have customers, that at least you know your product is not selling. I need to figure out a way to get a new product. When you have a capacity issue, that is the biggest challenge. Interesting thing, Apple as a company, which I think is either the most valuable, second most valuable, third most valuable. Of late, I don't know who's who because of NVIDIA.
There is someone who took over that place.
But I heard that they also lost $200 billion in market cap just recently. But still, it's I think it's Nvidia number 1, Microsoft number 2, and Apple number 3. But when you look at the cash reserves of these companies, let me take Apple as an example. Apple has $160 billion in cash reserves, like cash. Amafaranga muri bank, 162 billion, I think 162.1 billion dollars just sitting there. Now the question would be, okay, Apple have all that money, they must be good. But the CEO also has his stress, because for whatever he's trying to do, you might find that that's not even enough money. And somebody will be like, what, 160 billion is not enough? Yeah. And so what ends up happening is that if you understand the reality of life in general, the way God designed not just the human race, but even the environment in which we are, it's about adaptability, survival of the fittest, the principle of evolution. Now, when you are the principle of adaptation involves growth, right, Jesse? When you see a child born, when you look at an animal born, when you look at plants, any living being, flora and fauna, it grows. And so growth requires more of you than before. So what happens is that let's take children, babies. They need breast milk, they need food, they need nurturing. That helps them grow. Now, the same thing applies to our businesses. When we need to grow, or at least when we need our businesses to move from one level to the next, otherwise we're going to be regressing and eventually we'll lose our businesses, is that we need resources to help us grow. And here's the crazy bit. The resources at every level of growth are never going to be enough for your next level of growth. No matter who you are. That's why banks exist. That's why lenders exist. That's why investors exist. That's why capital markets exist, where you can say, I'm going to go into these environments. That's why we hire more employees, because we talked about time. So we talk of resources. So resources are time. We talk of money. We talk of human capital. So this is now where we're looking at even just networks, social capital, all of those things. You need to keep expanding. Now, when you take, again, Pareto's law, you talked about, isn't it a lot of work? I would rather, it is a lot of work. Let's just be straight. There's nothing in this world that comes easier, but it is the easiest. There's nothing that comes easy without work, but it's the easiest. In what sense? If I sit and I say, I'm going to work hard for 5 years, extremely hard, to build a kind of fortune that can outlive me and my children and my children's children, wouldn't you do it? I mean, just if that was just 5 years, but you would work hard. You would work 14-hour days. You would hardly sleep, but you're healthy. You're not killing yourself, but you are working more than you should, just for 5 years.
It takes a lot of intentionality to get there. Along the way, there come so many distractions.
And so, but you would still want it. There's
Of
no
course,
human
it's
being.
a wish.
Exactly.
I think for
If
so many
you
of
could
us,
work
yes.
hard for fewer years, but live like, there's actually a saying they to define entrepreneurship, and says entrepreneurship is living a few years like nobody is willing to live, so that you can live the rest of your life like nobody else can. That's the definition of entrepreneurship, though I feel like it's a bit sensationalist. But the logic is simple, right? You're going to spend a lot of time identifying your 20%. But once you identify it, you will become the most efficient. Why? Because now you don't waste time doing unnecessary things. In what sense? If I realize that, let's take a company as an example, employees. This one, any employer will tell you, there are a few employees who generate most of the results. The rest are just there to support the other guys.
Good vibes.
Exactly. Vibes and inshallah, right? When you look at that, then you now ask, as an entrepreneur, how do I now go about ensuring that my business can grow? I can invest in this human capital. It's simple. Once you've identified that 20%, you just give most of the responsibility to them, and then they manage the rest of the team. So your life becomes easier. But the hardest part is identifying those people and upskilling them and investing more in them. So the principle is, once you identify your 20%, double down on it. If it means putting in more money, if it means investing more resources in that aspect, even let's take, for example, even our businesses. In our markets, you have to be a serial entrepreneur. There are very few people who are lucky enough to have one business that succeeds, and that is what actually becomes their bread and butter and everything. But most people along the way will have one business, but then they'll invest in other things along the way to grow themselves.
But let's first ponder there. There are very few people, you say, who own more than one business, one that actually succeeds.
Yeah.
Why is the success rate really too low in a space where we know there will always be demand and supply?
No, but you see, you demand and supply, man. Business is about economics, right? It's about numbers. It's a numbers game. Unless you're selling high-end products, but in high-end products also need you to be in a high-end market. Like, I'm not going to sell a single product for $10,000 in Rwanda and expect to get critical mass. Actually, in the region.
Critical mass, not even Africa.
Yeah, like $100,000 product. There are people who sell products $1 million. How many customers are you going to really have who are going to spend $1 million on a particular product or service? It's not to say that we anything bad about us. It's just that once you understand where we are, when you look at our GDP per capita across the continent, like the highest GDP per capita is, I think it's Equatorial Guinea, if I'm not wrong, followed by Botswana. You're looking at guys who are at what, $20,000-$30,000 per person. But even still, what that means in a year, based on the GDP per capita, the GDP of the entire nation, the income generated by the citizens doesn't go above $30,000 on average. There are those, obviously, I mean, we talk of wealth distribution. There are those who make majority of that money. There are those who don't. But the question then comes in is, how do you expect to get critical mass for such high-end products? Okay, let's now take it on the low end of the spectrum. Now, low end of the spectrum, you're looking at commodities, FMCG, right? You're looking at your juices, your waters, your bombo, your rice, your sugars, your soaps, things that basic commodities that are used on a household level. That's where you could probably get critical mass. But best believe that particular area is completely saturated. So when I say it's very rare to hear a single entrepreneur, and again, this is not to say that people who are not successful with one business. There are many, but what I'm talking of now of a scalable business where you say, this person has a big company, a large enterprise, not an SME or an MSME, right? That's a unit of measure based locally set unit of measure of business success, right? So now you come and you say, okay, this individual has really succeeded in that context. They started a business, they grew it. There are very few, and it's purely just because of critical mass. Critical mass is linked to two things. One, it's number of customers, but also number of customers with the capacity or purchasing power to be able to buy what you're selling. So once you have an understanding of that, you realize that most guys are supplementing their incomes by having side businesses. But that doesn't take away from the fact that 20% of their businesses are going to generate 80% of the return. So profit and revenue. It's just a reality. But again, that does not discount the fact that the other 80% are not useful. I'll give you a simple example. When I was, I had a group of companies. Now that group of companies, I had some companies in there purely just for cash flow. In what sense? These businesses, the model was I was getting paid on a monthly basis from my clients, but I was only settling my suppliers after 3 months. So I would sit on large amounts of cash for 2-3 months at a time. And so that allowed me cash flow for my businesses, while the rest of my other businesses within the group were using the money for trade because they had money that they needed to be used on a daily basis. That particular business that particular business I told you where I was receiving payments on a monthly basis seemed like it was not bringing in most of the money. And truth be told, it was not. Like it fell in the other category of 80% that are bringing 20% of the results. But it served a purpose. And that's why I want us to talk about the limitations of Pareto's law or principle. Is because it's easy to say, okay, you have 20%, that means the other 80% are useless. You could also say like, oh, okay, in our organization, 20% of the employees or team members are bringing 80% of the results, so the other 80% are useless. It doesn't work like that.
Not entirely. They just could be the support system for the 20%.
Exactly. And so that's what unfortunately, Pareto's principle is a macro idea. And so it's easy to get lost in that macro thinking that, 20%, 80%, 20%, 80%. You need to find a balance. For me, I'm a student of duality. What does that simply mean? And I've talked about this before. Duality it's not Jesse or Ephraim. Why does it have to be like that? It can be Jesse and Ephraim. Actually, I love His Excellency because he highlighted it during Mushichirano. And during Mushichirano, he mentioned it, and I was like, you know, I'm a fan of His Excellency.
You're a fan of the RPF?
I'm a fan. Should I hide it? You aren't serious.
No, it's because there's been that conversation of being a fan of the RPF and being a fan of the presidential candidate, chairman of the RPF. Two things that I think research needs to help the RPF to identify.
But you need to understand the political economy to truly understand that it's not easy to say. It's not easy to dissociate the two. In what sense? Most of the work His Excellency has done as a leader, he uses what we call let's call them tools, right, or channels. So he does his work through different actors. So obviously we have the government officials, the ministries, and all of that. But when we talk, for example, of the manifesto is a strategic document, right? Where does strategy come from? It comes from the manifesto is developed at the RPF level, at the political level. And so it's now then disseminated down to the technicians who then implement. So you can't now, if you say, oh, RPF, His Excellency. Anyway, I want to talk about His Excellency where he talked about duality during Mushichirano. He said that he mentioned and he said, I hear people say that if you want to go fast, go by yourself. And if you want to go far, go with other people. Then he said, as we want to go fast and far, who says it's either or? Jesse, who says? Who set the rule and said you can either go fast or you can go far? Who sat somewhere and said this is the universal principle, this is how it's going to be, and it should be like this? No. And that's what I'm saying. That's duality. Duality says, and by the way, duality, I first came across duality in a book called Good to Great. If anybody wants, you read that book. It's very fantastic. Pretty much, don't limit yourself with options. Ask yourself, how many of these can we have at once? Right? And that's what I'm saying. Sometimes if you sit down on a micro level, you can have your 20% are generating results, but you can also get more value out of your 80%. Actually, if you go on a lower level, if you break it down, in your 80%, you can get 20% of those 80% who generate more value. You understand? Out of so what I'm trying to say is that if somebody truly wants to take this principle and has learned something new or knows it, but is like, how can I make this practical in my life? I would say sit down. First of all, like I said, determine that unit of measure. Then determine the steps. Then figure out how to prioritize those steps, those action steps. What's important? What will generate the most return? But then once you take a step back, also ask the other 80%, what value can I extract from them that can help improve the results of the 20%?
The time now is about 20 minutes until 9 o'clock. I'm with Ephraim Ramwanga. We're looking at the Pareto principle. And I think after the break, you will try to want to dismiss it and showcase the loopholes within the principle in itself. Because one, is it to say that when you identify the 20%, so concentrate there, it's like do not water the 80%. Concentrate on the 20%. If it's employees and you identify the 20% of the staff, pay them well, motivate them, then disregard.
Okay.
But let's look at this when we return after the break here on Kigali in the Morning. Every morning, the 8 at 8, I have Ephraim Ramwenge here in the studios. We're discussing the Pareto principle, the 20-80, 80-20 rule, whatever it is you want to call it. So we're trying to understand what this is and how it plays out, especially in the space of entrepreneurship. Where do you apply all your energies, your time? And to one point, you might think is actually very true, that concentrate on those areas that bring in the big stuff.
Yeah.
For instance, when you look at the country like Rwanda, when you look at mice, when you look at tourism, you'd say maybe the concentration should be in creating the infrastructure to ready ourselves for what brings in the bigger revenues. And then there's more things. Pay attention, but concentrate on the big things. Would you think otherwise?
It's so much. There's a reason why visionary leadership is called visionary leadership, because people see things that others don't see. And as I know some people say that it's innate, but I think even the people who you see who just naturally seem to always know where the market is going, know what the trends are, kind of can predict what's going to happen. Most people think that stuff you're born with it, but that's a muscle that people trained. I'll give you a simple example. I watched a video from the 90s recently of Bill Gates talking about how we're going to have pocket computers in the 90s. And if you understand the smartphone revolution, you understand that at the time when he's talking about this, even GUI, these graphical user interfaces that we use today on computers, had not yet been a thing. Like this Windows 95, the Macintosh, all of these things, these technologies where you could click using a mouse to click icons and all of that was not there. People used to actually use MS-DOS to communicate with a computer. And he's talking about a pocket computer. Fast forward, I don't know how many, 30-something years later, we have... most people can survive without a computer, like an actual computer, and still have the same computing power or functionality that it does by simply having a phone or a good phone, right? He saw something that nobody else saw. Now, I'm saying this because when you look at these massive companies that have outlived millennia, or at least let me not say millennia, they have lived centuries, like 100+ years. The Americans have a very nice term for it. They call it R&D. So R&D, research and development. Now, most of their budgets, when you hear Amazon saying that they were losing money, it's not that their unit economics were wrong. That's why the value of the company was going up. What does that simply mean? It doesn't mean that they were making a gross loss. A gross loss simply means that you are selling products cheaper than what you're buying them. No. That's not what Amazon's problem was. When people say Amazon for many years was losing money, their unit economics was solid, meaning they had a profitable business. Meaning if they bought Ibirai for 300, they sold it for 600. They were making 300 francs. But unfortunately for us, that 300 francs, we are going to take it. Actually, we're even going to take more, 400 francs, and then we're going to eat that money. Am I lying, Jesse?
Of course not.
Exactly. But when you hear people talk of research and development, what they do is that they take that 300, they'll take 250 of it and pump it back into discovering new products, finding ways to do their business better, research and development, researching opportunities, products, markets, trends, and then they develop products. And so, and I'm using the example of Amazon because Amazon was investing a lot of money into that. Now, even when you look at, that's why I say Pareto's law is a macro principle. And if it's a macro principle, then you need to approach it with macro thinking as well for it to be effective. Because at a macro level, there are holes in it, which we'll talk about. If you're going to look and say, should I ignore the other 80%? I would say, if you're satisfied with what you're making now.
And you're not looking at growth.
Because let's take, for example, a team. Let's use the example of a team, right? So you have 20%. Let's say you have 10 people, 10 team members, and 2 of them are your best performers. The other 8 are, but there is a categorization of employees or team members that we tend to use, at least if you measure performance within a team, is we have A players, B players, and C players. Now, A players are these 2 people. Fantastic, self-managed, self-organized. All they need is more. You just need to give them more skills, more responsibility, more resources, more, and they will do more with that more, right? Those are kawa, they're fine. Actually, your biggest challenge is keeping them motivated and then keeping them in your organization. For the B players are people who need guidance. direction. They need they need you to semi-hand hold them until they get to a point where they can manage themselves. So it could be somebody who's really good, but they haven't worked long. This is their first job. They're straight out of ALU or University of Kigali or CBE, University of Rwanda. Fresh graduate, maybe had a few internships here. You can see a self-starter, brilliant mind, work ethic, positive work ethic, attitude towards work is high, willingness to learn is high, ability to work with people is good, their talent profile for the job they're doing is superb, but they just lacked experience. So you're like, okay, I'm going to hold this person's hand. I'm going to call them, check on them, give them, almost mentor them along the way. That's your B player. So they're not necessarily bad. They just need they need that hand holding up until a certain point. So they can end up moving from your 80% to your 20%. They have the potential, and that's most B players. Then you have your C players. Man, those ones, they even think they know the job. We know all those types of employees. Those are the ones I keep telling people. I'm like, be quick to let them go within the confines of the law, right? That's what I'm saying. If somebody goes and says, I'm only going to focus on my 20%, I'm only going to put resources on my 20%, you're denying yourself the opportunity for growth. Because growth comes from that 80%. You can, within the 80%, the opportunities. Let's take, for example, products. If you look at, let's take the iPhone. And I'm going to give people history because these are things people don't know if you have not read these books. Do you know that the iPad was supposed to come out before the iPhone? Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. So Apple was a computer company. Right now, if you ask Apple where do they make most of their money, they make most of their money from iPhone. But in the 90s, it was the computer. Then they brought the iPod. The iPod really took up sales. Again, why would somebody, if you're making money from computers, why would you go make a music player? But again, R and D. They're like, from our 80% where we're not getting revenue, what can we pick from there that can move from being a B player or from that category of B to A, right? So they pick the iPod, they bring it. Now they were working on the iPad. The iPad was the next big thing. We need to get the iPad out. A touchscreen computer, touchscreen. It was the focus, a tablet. I don't know what happened, whether it was in the shower or whether he went on a long walk. I think it was a long walk. Something in him triggered or some information came to him. And he's like, we need to shelve that for now. The market is not yet ready for a tablet. What they need actually is a phone. And so do you know why this whole touch screen became a thing? He felt that the screen for the phones at the time were too small. This is Steve Jobs. And he's like, we need to put a bigger screen, but already we can't make the phone too big. It needs to fit in someone's pocket. So let's put the keyboard on the screen instead of out, because if you look at Blackberries, again, there are some people who don't even know what a Blackberry looked like, where it had like the keyboard. They really some people don't actually know. That's when you realize you're actually old. But phones used to have keyboards on the outside for those who didn't know. But the screen was very small. And so Steve Jobs is like, instead of wasting up all this space on a keyboard on the outside, let's put the keyboard as software. We can code it in and make the screen bigger. So they shelved iPad, brought the iPhone. That is part of what it means to be a visionary leader. So how do you build that muscle? You build the muscle with understanding how to spot trends. That comes with time. But then also reading, exposing your mind. Because again, I've said this on Living Entrepreneurship, that human beings, they say history does not repeat itself, but human nature does. That's things you can spot and say, here, the market is shifting in this direction. That businesses have done, I'm telling you, people will see me and they'll be like, but Ephraim is doing this. Before, people used to think I was just going with trends. Even the trends were not even there. But it's because I trained that muscle so much that I could spot an opportunity almost instantly and say, this thing is going to be big. You can see it. Let me give you a funny example. I landed on Amapiano like in 2016, 17. And I fell in love with Amapiano. In love.
Amapiano, the music.
Yeah. It sound, when something just resonates with the frequency of your DNA. It just sat with me in a way. I'm like, this is gonna be big. Fast forward, I don't know how many years, 4 or 5 years later, Amapiano, even the Nigerians were doing Amapiano. And it has lingered, but it's still there. because it's such good music. And so what I'm trying to say is that it's not like I'm innate. I was born with that sense of knowing what the next big thing would be from a music perspective. It's not like I was born with a musical ear. It's because I've listened to music so much. At one point in my life, I was even a music producer. I don't know if you know that. At some point, many years
You've
ago.
whispered it before.
Yeah, I
was just about to wonder if you produced Nama piano songs.
No, actually, because by the time my piano was out, I was not doing that anymore. But what I'm trying to tell you is that because of making music day in, day out, sitting with music, there's a way you can tell what's going to be big and what's not. And so it's the same thing even with business and opportunities. If you train that muscle, you'll be able to say, okay, yes, I have my 20% that's generating 80% of my income, but from my other 80%, even the employees, you'll be like, this one is special. If I give him time and I put in the effort and the energy, he might be able to join the other 20% and help me grow my business.
Because of time, we just have about 2 minutes. I'd like us to look at customer focus in terms of a customer base. How can entrepreneurs use the Pareto principle to identify and focus on their most valuable customers, and what impact can this have on business growth and customer satisfaction?
It's very hard to say that because we all know that the customers who pay us the best are normally the ones who don't stress us the most. And then also 80% of customer complaints come from 20% of clients. Like we know, like it's a given, but I keep repeating, coming back to this thing of growth. Don't get lost in the whole black and white 80-20. Even within the 80, there are ways you can extract people and bring them to your 20% to help your business grow. Because if you had 2 customers who are bringing 80% of your revenue, if you add 1 more client, that means now the 20% is bigger, meaning your 80% is also bigger, and so on and so forth. So if your 20% goes from 2 to 20, that means now you're dealing with 100 clients versus 10 clients, as an example, right? For me, I would say don't get lost, especially with clients. Man, clients can irritate you. Like, especially when you have pride, especially when you made a bit of money, it's very easy to look at a client and that over demanding things and they're stressing you to be like, I don't need. But trust me, some of those clients are the ones who even bring you the 20% clients. They will be the ones that, though after they've stressed you, you have barely made any money on that contract, they recommend you to somebody who now becomes a very good client. So what I'm trying to say is that for clients and for customers, again, categorize them like employees, A, B, and C. And if you are willing to let go of the C customers, let them go.
So what do you think about the classification of customers and then the fidelity programs? You've heard of these loyalty programs. I've seen several banks just the other day, I think, now just become a trend where banks are celebrating their
favorite clients, customer appreciation.
Customer appreciation. And they, I think it's like the top tier, those with the biggest chunks of money saved in their banks. So they're invited to a restaurant or to a hotel, 5-star hotel, and they are given all of these celebrations. And is it a fine thing to do? And what does it look like in the eyes and in the ears of the other customers who don't fit the tire?
So let me tell you about human beings. It's actually a very brilliant approach. And if you're a business, keep doing that. Why? Because we are attracted, we have FOMO. Let me put it like that. FOMO stands for fear of missing out. For those who are old enough like Jesse who don't know what FOMO stands for. FOMO is the logic that you're missing out on something good. Other people are benefiting and you're not. Other people are having a good time and you're not. You see people posting stuff on social media when they've gone out, or even people have gone for campaigns and you unfortunately were not able to go. There's a feeling you have of, I'm missing out. That is a normal human reaction. It's normal. You can't avoid it. By setting up a customer appreciation event or system, loyalty program, you are awarding your A customers, your category A customers, for showing you good. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, they've been loyal to you, they've supported you, they've trusted you with business. You also say thank you. That's normal. That's actually the right thing to do. Now, your B guys who are on the fence, who are not yet committed to the relationship, they see the prestige of being acknowledged. They get FOMO. They're like, I need to save more. do more with this business, give them more of my time, give them more of my resources. If I'm going to have a complaint, I do it in a polite way. Let's engage to find solutions. How do we work together so that they can move to A? So you end up converting your B customers to A customers, and then the C ones will get jealous and drop off and go elsewhere. So it works for everyone.
But is it also the application of the Pareto principle, concentrating on your top guys?
Yes, but again, I repeat, it's more robust. Instead of black and white of 80-20, it's more like, yes, we are appreciating the 20, but there's a benefit of onboarding some new people on the aspect of growth. Because Pareto's law, like I said, works in a fixed static environment. It does not account for growth.
So in avoiding any pitfalls, what should someone look at in their daily operations? The 20-80 rule, but you want to avoid the pitfalls of it. Again,
don't forget that this is a macro principle, right? It's a big picture thinker. It's a big picture principle that works for big picture thinking. For it to be effective, you need to also find ways to miniaturize it and make it applicable on a day-to-day basis. So at a micro level, what does that simply look like? What I talked about. You set your goals, you set your activities, you prioritize your activities. Now that becomes practical, because again, I repeat, if you keep thinking about it in a macro perspective, it's never going to benefit you, because this is an analysis tool. It's to analyze the past. It has no bearing on the future unless you find a way to make it actionable, because the future can only be acted on. You understand?
On an individual basis, would you say a Pareto principle could be applied on our daily relationships, on who do I give more time versus who do I give less of my attention?
Yeah. I mean,
that's
some
100%.
People who are time wasters. They waste your time. They're in category C. People who just you are going nowhere with them. You are taking them nowhere. They're taking you nowhere. There's no value you add when you sit. There's nothing you are discussing of value. There's nothing your relationship adds to both of you, other than the fact that you just know each other, and you seriously. You just have each other's numbers, but then you are like, this is my guy.
Even just filling up your inbox.
Exactly.
I mean,
your contacts.
Yes, your contact list.
Yeah. So that those types of people, it's okay to say, you keep them. You don't cut people off. That's a bit callous, but you keep them on the outskirts, but these are people I don't give a lot of my time, because your time is limited. You only have 24 hours a day, and so at least entirely without taking away time for sleeping. Now, if there are some people who just add value to your life, you can double down on those relationships. Then there are people you add value to their lives, and so they're also gonna double down on that, and it's okay. But obviously, boundaries are necessary for health. Like, you need to set healthy boundaries in relationships. So it's practical. It can be applied.
Thank you so much, Ephraim. We have been having a conversation on the Pareto principle and how we can apply it in the space of entrepreneurship. Every Tuesday here with Ephraim Romwenge. It's the 8 at 8.